One man engineered the greatest drug epidemic in American history, not from a cartel, not from a street gang, from a corporate boardroom. His name was Richard Sackler, and his drug killed more Americans than the entire Vietnam War, and he did it completely legally. Let me give you the numbers that should make your blood run cold. Between 1999 and 2019, over 500,000 Americans died from opioid overdoses. That's more deaths than every car accident in that same period. More than gun violence. More than any epidemic since the 1918 flu pandemic. And the drug at the center of it all, OxyContin, generated $35 billion in revenue for one company, Purdue Pharma, while it burned through American lives like gasoline on a fire. Here's what people don't understand. This wasn't addiction that spiraled out of control. This wasn't a drug that accidentally became dangerous. This was engineered, calculated, executed with the precision of a military operation. Richard Sackler turned trusted family doctors into drug dealers and turned middle America into ground zero for mass death. And he did it following a playbook so effective, so mathematically precise, that it addicted an entire nation before anyone realized what was happening. This is not a story about addiction. This is a story about empire-scale engineering. How one pharmaceutical executive weaponized medicine itself and deployed it through the very system designed to protect us. There are 5 stages to how Richard Sackler did it. 5 deliberate decisions, each one documented in internal emails, in sealed court depositions, in FDA filings that got buried for decades. 5 stages that turned pain relief into a death sentence for 500,000 people. And by the time regulators, doctors, and families understood what was happening, millions were already hooked. The dependency was already locked in. The cascade was already inevitable. But to understand how Richard Sackler pulled this off, you need to understand what he inherited. Because the Sackler playbook didn't start with OxyContin. It started with a lie that was 50 years in the making. The story begins decades before OxyContin, in the advertising offices of 1950s Manhattan, where a psychiatrist named Arthur Sackler was building something unprecedented. Arthur wasn't just selling medicine. He was rewriting how medicine itself got sold. Before Arthur Sackler, pharmaceutical companies marketed drugs through dry medical journals and conservative medical conferences. Arthur Sackler saw that model and understood it was leaving billions of dollars on the table. He founded a medical advertising empire and purchased a small pharmaceutical company called Purdue Frederick in 1952. Then he did something revolutionary. He stopped selling to patients and started selling to doctors. His first target was a new anti-anxiety drug called Valium. But Valium had a problem. Anxiety wasn't considered a disease requiring medication. It was just part of life. So Arthur Sackler created the disease. His advertising campaigns bombarded medical journals with articles, studies, and advertisements reframing normal human stress as a pathological condition requiring pharmaceutical intervention. He sent sales representatives directly to doctors' offices with free samples and glossy brochures. He funded conferences and paid physicians to speak about the anxiety epidemic sweeping America. And it worked. By the 1970s, Valium became the most prescribed drug in the United States. In 1978 alone, 2.3 billion Valium tablets were sold. That's roughly 10 pills for every man, woman, and child in America. The playbook was simple. Medicalize a normal human condition. Advertise directly to physicians with pseudo-scientific authority. Downplay addiction risks. Normalize mass prescribing. Then scale production to meet the demand you created. Arthur Sackler had proven the model worked. When he died in 1987, his brothers Mortimer and Raymond inherited Purdue Pharma and the methodology, and they passed both to Arthur's nephew, Richard Sackler. Richard saw what his uncles didn't. Valium's patent was expiring. Benzodiazepines were facing increased regulation. The FDA was finally catching up to the addiction crisis Arthur's drug had caused. But there was another drug class nobody was watching closely: opioids. In 1990, Richard Sackler joined Purdue's board of directors. 6 years later, in 1996, OxyContin launched. And Richard Sackler deployed the family playbook with one terrifying upgrade. He didn't just want market share, he wanted total market domination. He wanted every doctor in America prescribing his drug. He wanted OxyContin to become as common as aspirin, as routine as antibiotics. And he got exactly that. Let me show you how he did it, stage by stage, decision by decision, body by body. Stage number 1, the lie, the foundation of everything. In 1995, 1 year before OxyContin launched, Purdue Pharma began training over 1,000 sales representatives with a single message to deliver to doctors across America. Addiction to opioids is rare. Less than 1% of patients become addicted. You can prescribe this medication without fear. And doctors believed it because Purdue cited a source, a letter published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1980. Except that letter wasn't a study. It was 5 sentences, a paragraph. A Boston University doctor named Herschel Jick had reviewed hospital records and noted that among patients given opioids in controlled hospital settings, addiction was rare. But Purdue twisted those 5 sentences into blanket reassurance for mass prescribing in completely uncontrolled environments. Home use, refillable prescriptions, months of continuous dosing. And when OxyContin launched in 1996, Richard Sackler put that lie at the center of everything. An internal memo from Richard Sackler that year read, "OxyContin will be followed by a blizzard of prescriptions that will bury the competition, not a steady increase. A blizzard. Overwhelming force." Sales representatives fanned out to doctors' offices with the message drilled into them. This drug is safe. This drug is non-addictive. You're under-treating pain if you don't prescribe it. And doctors, trusting the science they thought backed these claims, began writing prescriptions by the thousands. Stage number 2. The target. Purdue didn't go after cancer patients. The cancer pain market was too small, too specialized, too scrutinized by oncologists who understood opioids. Richard Sackler wanted volume. He wanted every family doctor, every general practitioner, every urgent care clinic prescribing OxyContin for routine injuries. So Purdue created a new disease, the chronic pain epidemic. They funded pain management advocacy groups. They distributed over 15,000 promotional videos to doctors claiming America was under-treating pain on a massive scale. They introduced the concept of pain as the 5th vital sign, pushing medical organizations to treat any patient complaint of discomfort as requiring pharmaceutical intervention. And they targeted a specific population: working-class Americans, Rust Belt factory workers with back injuries, Appalachian coal miners with joint pain, construction workers recovering from surgeries, people whose labor destroyed their bodies and who had limited access to physical therapy, to surgical solutions, to any option except a pill. These weren't people seeking highs. They were people seeking relief. And Purdue's sales force descended on the family doctors who treated them. By the year 2000, OxyContin was being prescribed for headaches, for dental pain, for sports injuries, for any condition that caused discomfort. The target wasn't disease. The target was normal human pain. And the battlefield was every doctor's office in America. Stage number 3, the dosage deception. OxyContin's so-called innovation was its time-release formula. 1 pill, 12 hours of pain relief. That was the promise. Take it twice a day, and your pain stays controlled without the peaks and valleys of shorter-acting medications. Except it didn't work. Purdue's own clinical trials showed the 12-hour duration failed in a significant percentage of patients. The drug wore off faster. Pain returned. Withdrawal symptoms kicked in. And instead of reformulating the drug or admitting the 12-hour claim was false, Purdue told doctors to prescribe higher doses. If the patient's pain returns before 12 hours, Don't switch medications. Increase the dose. This created a perfect addiction spiral. Higher dose means faster tolerance. Faster tolerance means the drug stops working sooner. Earlier withdrawal means the patient feels sick, anxious, desperate. And the solution Purdue offered was always the same: more OxyContin. By 2002, Purdue was recommending doses as high as 160 milligrams. That's the equivalent of 16 Percocet tablets in a single pill. Patients, who started on legitimate prescriptions for moderate pain, found themselves on doses that would have been considered dangerously high just years earlier. And their bodies were chemically dependent within weeks, not because they were abusers, because the drug was designed to create dependency, and the dosing protocol accelerated it. Stage number 4, the expansion. Purdue's sales representatives operated on commission. The more prescriptions their doctors wrote, the more money they earned. Top performers made over $500,000 annually, and Purdue gave them quotas, territories, performance bonuses for hitting prescription targets. They were told to overcome any doctor hesitation about addiction by citing the less than 1% lie. They paid physicians to speak at conferences, some earning $300,000 a year as Purdue consultants. These weren't bribes in the legal sense. They were speaker fees, consulting agreements, payments dressed up as legitimate business expenses. But the effect was the same. Doctors became financially invested in prescribing OxyContin, and the numbers exploded. By 2010, American doctors were writing 254 million opioid prescriptions annually. That's enough for every adult in the United States to have their own bottle of pills. In some counties, there were more opioid prescriptions than people. Pharmacies in tiny towns were ordering millions of pills, and Purdue kept manufacturing, kept shipping, kept selling. They saw the data, they knew where the pills were going, and they increased production to meet demand. Stage number 5. Blame the victims. As overdose deaths began making headlines, as emergency rooms started filling with unresponsive patients, as families buried their children, Richard Sackler shifted strategy. He didn't pull back. He didn't restrict prescribing. He blamed the people dying. In a 2001 email, as reports of OxyContin-related deaths mounted, Richard Sackler wrote, "We have to hammer on abusers in every way possible. They are the culprits and the problem. They are reckless criminals. Not the drug, not the company, not the marketing. The victims were criminals." Purdue funded anti-abuse campaigns while simultaneously continuing their aggressive marketing to doctors. When the FDA added a black box warning to OxyContin in 2001, the strongest warning the agency can issue, Purdue used it as a liability shield. "We warned them," they'd say in court. "If people misused it, that's on them." And as lawsuits started appearing, as state attorneys general began investigating, the Sackler family began extracting money from Purdue Pharma. Between 2008 and 2018, they withdrew $10.7 billion. They purchased luxury real estate in Boca Raton, in Manhattan, in London. They funded museum wings and university departments, slapping the Sackler name on institutions to launder their reputation, while bodies piled up in morgues across America. 5 stages, each one deliberate, each one documented in emails that would later surface in court, in testimony that would be sealed and buried, in internal documents that showed Purdue and the Sacklers knew exactly what they were doing. Richard Sackler didn't lose control of his product. He engineered addiction at an empire scale and called it medicine. And here's what should keep you awake at night. By the time regulators caught on, it was already too late. The damage was irreversible. Let me show you what 500,000 deaths actually looks like on the ground. In Appalachia, overdose rates hit 50 deaths per 100,000 people. That's higher than active war zones. In West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio, entire towns were decimated, not metaphorically, literally emptied of working-age adults. Consider Kermit, West Virginia. Population 400. A single pharmacy in that town ordered 9 million opioid pills over 2 years. That's 22,500 pills per person, babies included. The pharmacy wasn't an outlier. It was the model playing out in thousands of communities where Purdue's distribution network operated without oversight, without question, without any mechanism to stop pills from flooding into populations that couldn't possibly consume them legitimately. The human cost follows a pattern that should be seared into your memory. The average age of an opioid overdose death is 39 years old. Not elderly patients at end of life. Not terminally ill cancer patients. Working-age Americans in their prime earning years. 72,000 people died from opioid overdoses in 2017 alone. That single year exceeded the entire death toll of the Vietnam War, a conflict that lasted nearly 2 decades. The foster care system collapsed under the weight. 2.5 million children ended up raised by grandparents because their parents were dead or too addicted to function. Hospital emergency rooms in rural areas treated more overdoses than heart attacks. Paramedics carried naloxone, the overdose reversal drug, the way soldiers carry tourniquets. They used it multiple times per shift. The economic collapse paralleled the human one. The Council of Economic Advisers calculated the opioid crisis cost the American economy $696 billion in 2018, not over decades, in 1 year. Labor force participation rates in affected regions plummeted. Employers couldn't find workers who could pass drug tests. Life expectancy in the United States declined 3 years in a row from 2015 to 2017. That hadn't happened since World War I. Not during the AIDS crisis, not during any modern epidemic. The decline was driven entirely by opioid deaths concentrated in working-class communities that Richard Sackler had targeted with surgical precision. And here's where the pattern becomes a cascade. Prescription opioids created the blueprint for everything that followed. When doctors finally began cutting off prescriptions under regulatory pressure, patients didn't stop needing opioids. Their bodies were chemically dependent. Withdrawal is agony, bone-deep pain, violent illness, psychological torture that makes death seem preferable. So they turned to heroin. Heroin deaths quadrupled between 2010 and 2015. Then fentanyl arrived, 50 times stronger than heroin, cheaper to manufacture, easier to smuggle. Dealers began cutting heroin with fentanyl, and users started dying from doses they thought were safe. By 2020, fentanyl was responsible for 70% of all opioid deaths. The connection is direct. Richard Sackler's OxyContin created millions of opioid-dependent Americans. When the legal supply constricted, the illegal market expanded to meet demand. Every fentanyl death in a truck stop bathroom, every teenager who took what they thought was a Xanax and never woke up, every mother found dead with a needle in her arm traces back to the dependency Richard Sackler manufactured and sold as medicine. His response when the death reports started surfacing, that 2001 email again. We have to hammer on abusers in every way possible. They are the culprits and the problem. They are reckless criminals. The victims were criminals. The parents burying children were enablers. The doctors who prescribed in good faith based on Purdue's lies were complicit. Everyone was responsible except the man who engineered the system. So what happened to Richard Sackler? What happened to the man who turned American medicine into a drug cartel and walked away while the bodies piled up? Here's where the pattern gets even darker. In 2007, Purdue Pharma pleaded guilty to federal charges of misbranding OxyContin. The crime was felony misrepresentation of the drug's addiction risk. The fine was $600 million. That sounds significant until you remember OxyContin had generated $35 billion in revenue by that point. The fine was less than 2% of profits, and Richard Sackler, he wasn't charged, not criminally, not personally. 3 Purdue executives pleaded guilty and paid $34.5 million in personal fines. They received probation, no jail time, no criminal record that would prevent them from working in pharmaceuticals again. The message to the industry was clear. You can addict millions, kill hundreds of thousands, and the worst consequence is a negotiated fine paid from company funds while executives walk free. The real reckoning seemed to arrive between 2014 and 2019, when thousands of lawsuits hit Purdue from every direction. State attorneys general, counties, cities, families of the dead. Internal documents surfaced in discovery. Emails that showed Richard Sackler knew about addiction risks, knew about the deaths, knew the 12-hour dosing claim was false, and pushed sales harder anyway. His depositions became public record. Under oath, Richard Sackler was asked directly if he bore responsibility for the opioid crisis. His answer, delivered in 2015, I don't know. Not denial, not acceptance. Studied ignorance. In 2019, facing the mounting legal pressure, Purdue Pharma declared bankruptcy. But this wasn't surrender, it was strategy. The bankruptcy filing allowed the Sackler family to negotiate a settlement that would shield them from all future litigation. They offered $4.5 billion, later increased to $6 billion. In exchange, every member of the Sackler family would receive complete legal immunity. No criminal charges. No further civil suits. Total protection. A federal judge approved the deal in 2021. Families of victims protested outside the courthouse. They held photographs of their dead children, their dead parents, their dead siblings. The judge acknowledged their pain and approved the settlement anyway. The Supreme Court heard challenges to the deal in 2023. In 2024, they allowed it to stand. The math is simple and devastating. The Sacklers extracted $10.7 billion from Purdue over the years leading up to bankruptcy. They paid back $6 billion in the settlement. They kept $4.7 billion personally. No criminal charges, no jail time, no admission of wrongdoing. Richard Sackler lives in a mansion in Austin, Texas, purchased in 2015 for $1.4 million. His current net worth is estimated above $1 billion, though the exact figure is hidden behind trusts and legal structures designed for exactly this purpose. He gave a handful of depositions. He appeared in no trials. The Sackler name has been removed from museum wings at the Louvre, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, at universities that finally caved to public pressure. But the family wealth remains intact. Other members of the Sackler family purchased estates in Boca Raton, penthouses in Manhattan, properties in London. They continue to live as billionaires while 500,000 graves mark the cost of their fortune. And here's what should terrify you about the Richard Sackler story. It's not just that he got away with it. It's that he proved the model works. He demonstrated that you can addict millions, kill hundreds of thousands, and walk away a billionaire. And that lesson hasn't been lost on the pharmaceutical industry. The pattern Richard Sackler perfected is being replicated right now in real time, with different drugs following the exact same playbook. Look at benzodiazepines. Xanax and Ativan prescriptions are surging. The same medicalization of normal anxiety that Arthur Sackler pioneered with Valium is happening again. 92 million Americans are prescribed benzos annually. Addiction rates are climbing. The warning signs are identical to OxyContin's early years, and the regulatory response is just as slow. Look at ADHD stimulants. Adderall shortages created by what investigators suspect is artificial scarcity and overprescription. Adult ADHD diagnoses have increased 400% since 2000. The same aggressive marketing to physicians. The same normalization of mass prescribing for conditions that were once managed without pharmaceutical intervention. Look at weight loss drugs. Ozempic and Wegovy, approved for diabetes, are now being marketed for cosmetic weight loss. The same off-label mass prescribing pattern. Long-term dependency effects are unknown. Novo Nordisk's stock is up 300% in 3 years. The same financial incentive structure that drove Purdue is driving them. The regulatory system hasn't changed. The FDA still relies on manufacturer-funded studies. The revolving door between FDA officials and pharmaceutical company executive positions remains wide open. No executive has faced criminal charges for the opioid epidemic. The message to every pharmaceutical boardroom is mathematically clear. You can settle for billions and keep billions more. You can engineer addiction at scale, and the worst consequence is a negotiated fine that still leaves you wealthy beyond measure. Richard Sackler didn't break the system. He showed how well it works for people like him. 500,000 Americans are dead. The man most responsible is a billionaire living freely in Texas. And the next pharmaceutical epidemic is already being engineered in another boardroom, following his exact pattern. Maybe next time we'll catch it earlier. Maybe next time regulators will act before millions are addicted. Maybe next time executives will face real consequences. But the Richard Sackler pattern says otherwise. Because when you can addict an empire and walk away rich, why would you ever do anything different? This is the story of Richard Sackler, the man who turned American medicine into a drug cartel, the man who proved you can kill 500,000 people and never see the inside of a prison cell, and the man whose playbook is being copied right now.